Is this the greatest book ever written? Today we're going to be talking about As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. I'm Nathan Frazier.
And I'm Brett Venat.
And this is Mindset and Mastery.
Nathan, I'm a complete fraud. We're almost like 10 episodes into our first season of Mindset and Mastery. I am, at the tail end of 12 years of doing content on personal development and self-knowledge for School Sucks. And I had never read this book, and I just can't believe it. I feel like that is unacceptable, and I'm sorry.
Bro, when I suggested that we do this book and you told me you had never read it, I was shocked. This is like, I don't want to say it's my Bible, but this book probably had more impact on my life than anything I've ever read before. And I know it's like a hidden gem that most people don't come across, but I totally thought that it would have been something that you had come across. I was really shocked when you told me you'd never even heard of it.
Do you ever read something that's like so good that part of you, even just for a moment, goes, I don't want to tell anybody about this. But then you say, no, that's my responsibility. And that's me living in harmony, which is what we're going to talk about today, to share this knowledge with the world. So that's what we're about to do. Now, before we start, I do just want to call back a couple episodes ago. We were talking about Napoleon Hill and outwitting the devil. And at the very beginning of that conversation, we entertained the idea that maybe Hill was a kind of a fraud, or he embellished his story and he never really met Andrew Carnegie. He could have totally just read this book, which was written 35 years before either of his, in like 1903, by this obscure British poet and philosopher named James Allen, right? James Allen is the name. Mm-hmm. Died very young, by the way. Very strange. But very little information about James Allen. But Hill totally could have ripped his great works off from James Allen. It just requires a little bit of expansion, but it's a lot of the same material. I will also say that this book was very reminiscent of one of my favorite books and the most impactful books for me, Nathaniel Branden's Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, where Allen really stresses the importance of Branden's first pillar or practice, which is the act of living consciously, being a good accountant of your own thoughts and subsequent actions. The other 5 pillars of the Six Pillars of Self-Esteem by Branden that all relate to As a Man Thinketh. The second one is self-acceptance. The third one is responsibility. The fourth one is self-assertiveness. The fifth one is living purposefully. And the sixth one is living with integrity. And I think that for Allen, that is the biggest one, even though I don't think he uses the word integrity in the book at all. He uses the word harmony. In the past, we've talked about the concept of self-integration, consistent living as a result of conscious living. So I think that is the big theme that comes through in just this absolutely action-packed book, right? It's an hour-long audio book. You could probably skim it on your own if you can find a PDF. And the book is everywhere. It's real easy to find, but it could be less than an hour project. And because of that, I've just gone through it again and again since we first started talking about this. Yeah, it really breaks through cliches of like self-knowledge or authenticity. These are words that we hear all the time until they really just don't have that much impact. And his use or his summation of those concepts in this word harmony, I think, is one of the biggest payoffs in this book.
Yeah, and I just want to give a little bit of background as to when I found this book. I was probably in my early 20s. I was in a lot of trouble with the legal system. I was in and out of court all the time, in and out of jail all the time. And very much, I felt disempowered. I felt like the world was set up against me. I was very much in my rebellious, libertarian, anarcho fighting against the New World Order days, and I came across this book, somebody that was teaching me certain things about the law that I'm not going to really get into. He was like, yo, you need to read this book, because I was very angry. I was lashing out at the world, and I felt very disempowered. I read this book in about 45 minutes in one sitting, and the first time I read it, it just changed my life. I was just like, holy crap. And the thing that really stands out about this book for me is there's no fluff, there's no filler. Every single word, every single sentence in this book is quotable. Every single sentence in this book is just packed with power. And so it's going to be difficult to actually do this conversation because there's so much to talk about, but I figured we could kind of break it down to the top 5 takeaways. I put up a couple examples of stuff that I wanted to talk about. You put up a couple as well. I think we can go over a couple of the ideas that he's trying to get across, maybe read a little bit from the book, and then give our insights back and forth. How does that sound to you?
Yeah. So today's show is probably going to be a lot of reading, and maybe I have to warn people a little bit of stumbling because it was written by a Brit over 100 years ago. So some of his language choices and sentence structures are a little awkward. But it really is, you're right. That is a challenge of producing a synopsis of this, is that it's almost like every other paragraph is gold, right? Mm-hmm. There's so many great lines in this book. So because it was my first encounter and Nathan encountered it like 20 years ago, you've got 2 and I've got 3, and that's going to add up to our top 5 takeaways from As a Man Thinketh.
So if possible, I would like to kind of bounce back and forth. I'd like to let you go first, and then I'll go, and then you go, and then I'll go, and then I'll let you close out the show.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So a few of mine, actually, and I could have had 15. So the fact that I have 3, I think 2 of them come from very early on in the book. And I'm going to lead off with, you attract what you are, not what you want. So this is kind of the undoing of that idea of The Secret. Alan writes in the book, men do not attract that which they want, but that which they are. Their whims, fancies, and ambitions are thwarted at every step, but their inmost thoughts and desires are fed with their own food, be it foul or clean. The divinity that shapes our ends is in ourselves. It is our very self. Only himself manacles man. Thought and actions are the gaolers of fate. That is a word for jailers, basically. Gaolers. So let's call it the jailers of fate. They imprison, being base. They are also the angels of freedom. They liberate, being noble. Not what he wishes and prays for does a man get, but what he justly earns. His wishes and prayers are only gratified and answered when they harmonize with his thoughts and actions. So this is kind of your equation, or I learned this from you long ago. Others have said similar things. Be, do, have. And I think that people in this very possessive, materialistic kind of world, they think about it as, once I have this, which is usually money, I'll be able to be and do whatever they think is actually beyond that. And the equation that you taught me reverses that order. Be first. That's like, to go back to our show that we did on morning routines, like what you are kind of expressing to yourself at that most crucial part of the day about who you are and what you believe about yourself translates to what you do, and ultimately translates to what you have. And we're going to be revisiting that idea in a little bit. There's just one more part of that I wanted to read. It's a little further down in the same chapter. Man is the causer, though nearly always is unconsciously, of his circumstances, and that, whilst aiming at a good end, he is continually frustrating its accomplishment by encouraging thoughts and desires which cannot possibly harmonize with that end. So it is this, I have this private community, and we do a film club, and we were recently talking about this 2017 film called The Circle. Have you ever seen The Circle?
Yeah, it was like a big tech type movie.
Yeah, so it's like, it's hard to, the movie is a mess. And I think it kind of got like the Eyes Wide Shut treatment where it was taken to be shown by the big bosses. And they say, you're not putting that out like that. Cut out this much of it before this hits a theater. So I have a theory that's what happened with The Circle. Because it seems to be critical of big tech companies like Google and Facebook. And the company in the movie, The Circle, is kind of like a combination of Google and Facebook. But the protagonist in the film participates in this experiment where she basically films her entire life and makes it available for the public. And from that, the film, or more specifically, the tech company, floats this idea that privacy is theft. Having a private life is theft because you're robbing other people of experiences that you could be sharing with them. So we're discussing this as a group. And there was a really astute observation about authentic living by one of the participants who said, I'm not in good enough shape to deserve to see what the top of Mount Everest looks like, right? So in authentic living, or harmonizing action with experience, right? Or action with outcome, I thought that was a really, really good insight. And one last thing before we wrap this first one up, Alan continues towards the end of that chapter. A man is not rightly conditioned until he is a happy, healthy, and prosperous being. And happiness, health, and prosperity are the result of a harmonious adjustment of the inner with the outer, of man with his surroundings. Right? So you can't hide, and I'm going to come back to this one too in another one of my big takeaways. You can't hide your inner self from the outer world, ultimately.
Just to add to that, back in my hip hop days, we had a saying, real recognize real. And it was basically, the realness in me recognizes the realness in you. We have a tendency to attract what we harmonize with. And a lot of times we're working against our own self-interests, both in our actions and in our thoughts. And as far as this particular book is concerned, when I read it, like I said, I was very focused on what they were doing, what the deep state, back before there was the deep state, what they were doing to restrict my freedoms and impose their agenda on my life and all of this. And I kept thinking to myself, I want to be free, but I keep focusing on the imprisonment. I want to be free, but all I do is I spend all of my time and my energy worried about the jailers. And I'm not actually thinking about how do I build a freer life? What do I need to do to have more control over my life? I keep saying what I want is freedom, but I keep putting all of my energy and my attention on the areas of my life where I'm not free. And it was one of those things, and this leads into what my favorite takeaway from the book is that the mind is a garden. He says, a man's mind may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein and will continue to produce their kind. Just as a gardener cultivates his plot, keeping it free from weeds and growing the flowers and fruits which he requires, so may a man tend to the garden of his mind, weeding out all the wrong, useless, and impure thoughts, and cultivating toward perfection the flowers and fruits of right, useful, and pure thoughts. And when I came across this, I was definitely in victim mindset. I was definitely in my life sucks because the powers that be are destroying the little bit of freedom that I have, and they're destroying the economy, and they're making me take my shoes off when I get on an airplane, and all of these things. And I don't think that we should ignore the weeds in the garden, but what I got from this is I'm putting all of my water on the weeds. My attention is the water that I pour onto my garden, and all of the water is being poured on the weeds. So what is my garden going to turn into if I don't put any attention into the good stuff? I don't put any attention or water onto the fruits and the vegetables that I want to be producing. All of my water is going to the weeds. my life is just going to be overrun with weeds. And that simple mindset shift of make sure that you're plucking the weeds out, make sure you're aware that those weeds are there and you're not letting them go out, get out of control, but also make sure that you're putting the majority of your attention, your water, onto the fruits and vegetables that you want to see come to fruition. That was a huge mindset shift for me. And it was also like a major lifestyle shift. I started consciously saying, is this worth my attention? How much attention is this worth? And could my attention be going to do something that makes my life better rather than focusing on stuff that makes my life miserable? And I think at the same time, you were doing a podcast series and you were talking about spheres of control. At the same time that I was it was like very synchronistic. And those two ideas, the spheres of control and the mind is a garden, those two combined and made this super powerful shift in my life where all of a sudden I started focusing more of my energy on the things I could control and the things that would bring forth the life that I wanted, bring forth the garden that I wanted. And I would say that one, if anything out of this book, that one thing combined with the spheres of control idea just completely changed the direction of my life.
Sure. I'll reinforce that with the words of another obscure foreign philosopher named Jordan Peterson, right? Who told people to clean their room. So to incorporate the spheres of control into that, it's this idea that, yes, those problems in the world exist and you feel maybe not an obligation, but some desire and maybe even some responsibility to educate people about them and to try to be the change that you want to see. You're much better equipped to do that if you're taking care of yourself first, right? So whether it's clean your room before you try to change the world, be the gardener of that garden, right? Be taking care of that garden. He says a little later on, man is buffeted by circumstances so long as he believes himself to be the creature of outside conditions. Mm-hmm. But when he realizes that he is a creative power and that he may command the hidden soil and seeds of his being out of which circumstances grow, he then becomes the rightful master of himself. So that's, again, another reinforcement of the spheres of control, clean your room, garden your own garden kind of idea right there. Mm-hmm. There's just one more great line in that same section. I think this was all in chapter 2, and the book only has, like 6 or 7 chapters. Circumstance does not make the man. It reveals him to himself. Mm-hmm. I love that line. I think that is so good. So we move on to my second and our number 3 overall. You cannot ultimately keep thought secret. So those are my words, not his, but this is the way he puts it in the book. Men imagine that thought can be kept secret, but it cannot. It rapidly crystallizes into habit, and habit solidifies into circumstance. I want to read that one more time because that is such an important cause and effect. Men imagine that thought can be kept secret, but it cannot. It rapidly crystallizes into habit, and then habit solidifies into circumstance. He then does a long list of like this, then this, then this, both bad and good, but I'm just going to give a couple of examples of each. So he follows that up by saying bestial thoughts crystallize into habits of drunkenness and sensuality, which solidify into circumstances of destitution and disease. Impure thoughts of every kind crystallize into enervating and confusing habits, which solidify into distracting and adverse circumstances. So he gives several more of those, and then he kind of turns it around and says, on the other hand, beautiful thoughts of all kinds crystallize into habits of grace and kindliness, which solidify into genial and sunny circumstances. Pure thoughts crystallize into habits of temperance and self-control, which solidify into circumstances of repose and peace. One more, thoughts of courage, self-reliance, and decision crystallize into manly habits, which solidify into circumstances of success, plenty, and freedom. And he actually goes on and on. But this, again, reminded me of Brandon, and I don't think Brandon wrote this in the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. I think he wrote it in a book called The Disowned Self, which is, again, to just link it up with Alan, a self that is out of harmony, or parts of self, as the title suggests, that are disrupting the harmony that like the outer self is trying to portray. But Brandon had this great line that people will do things and then they will justify it by saying, only I will know, right? So there'll be some kind of bad or shameful habit or some kind of dishonesty. And they say, but only I will know, right? It's a secret that I can keep in my head. And Brandon follows that up by saying, who else do you think matters? Right? Because at that point, it's kind of like the gas mask thing, like put your, not gas mask, oxygen mask. Oxygen is gas. Put yours on first so you can help others, right? So if you're like trying to help others, but keeping a bunch of dirty or shameful secrets, it's not going to translate into the solid, integrated, confident self that is going to be able to really help other people. So, get rid of the only I will know kind of thinking. That's all that matters, because you cannot keep that stuff secret ultimately. Thoughts crystallize into habit, habit solidifies into circumstance. So that it's a really good message about being honest with yourself and honest with others.
And we've had this discussion where me and you kind of took different positions on it, where is it your behavior or is it your thoughts, and which one is the one to give more consideration to, or which one takes precedence. Right. I've always felt, especially from reading this book, that it's the thoughts, and that is a large part of why is both conscious and subconscious thoughts have an impact on your behavior. Your behavior has a huge impact on everything else, but it feels like your subconscious and your conscious thoughts are kind of like the rudder that steers your behavior. And in order to make a conscious decision to change your behavior, you have to change your thoughts first.
Right. And don't disown destructive thoughts or negative thoughts. Don't disown anxiety. It kind of goes back to our last conversation about trauma-based mind control and how to have a more helpful and productive fear response. People run away from anxiety, right? So much industry in this country, whether it's technological or chemical, is about helping people escape anxiety. And it can be tempting. It can be really, as somebody who's struggled with that throughout my life, it can be really, really tempting to look for quick and easy, microwave popcorn, gross solutions to those kinds of things. So really embracing anxiety, but not just embracing it and going, oh, I love feeling nervous like this, and I love not being able to sit still. But part of the embrace is the exploration of what is actually going on there. What are the roots of that feeling? And the acceptance of the fact that, that feeling might keep coming. It might be really, really deep in a well, and it might take a long time to get to the actual cause of whatever that is, but it's a part of life, and you can accept it, and you don't have to disown it, and you don't have to try and separate it from yourself, and that can be true with self-defeating thoughts, negative thoughts, anything like depressive thoughts. It's just like, hey, that's a part of me. Let's bring it to the surface and see what's there.
So I'm going to go a complete 180 degrees from you on that one, because the one that I wanted to talk about next was the importance of maintaining balance and calm.
I actually, just real quick, I think they're related, right? Because if you're disowning that stuff or you're trying to hide from that stuff, you're never going to be able to achieve balance, right? Balance is like you take everything and eventually you can kind of even it out. But if you're ignoring certain things or acting like they're not there, true calm and balance are never going to come. So I get what you're saying for sure, but I think that is part of the difficult stuff is part of the balancing act.
So I'm a big fan of Stoicism. I'm sure you're probably as well. A large part of Stoicism, though, is about accepting what is and realizing that the only thing you have power over is how you react to what is. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but there's enough there that I think it's worth talking about. I'm somebody who I have a really difficult time being around very anxious energy. I grew up with my mom had a lot of anxiety, and it's not an enjoyable thing for me to be around very anxious energy. And it's not an enjoyable thing for me to exude or to put out anxious energy. And for me, a lot of what I value in life is calm, peaceful tranquility. And so I love being out in the mountains way more than I love being in the city. I love being around people who are chill and relaxed way more than I love people who are manic and freaking out. The reason why this part resonated with me is because it totally matches what I've experienced in life. And so I'm just going to read a quick section from the book real quick. He says, "The calm man, having learned how to govern himself, knows how to adapt himself to others, and they, in turn, reverence his spiritual strength and feel that they can learn from him and rely upon him. The more tranquil a man becomes, the greater is his success, his influence, his power for good. Even the ordinary trader will find his business prosperity increase as he develops a greater self-control and equanimity. For people will always prefer to deal with a man whose demeanor is equable. The strong, calm man is always loved and revered. He is like a shade-giving tree in a thirsty land, or a sheltering rock in a storm. Who does not love a tranquil heart, a sweet-tempered, balanced life? It does not matter whether it rains or shines, or what changes come to those possessing these blessings, for they are always sweet, serene, and calm." Now, I'm going to say I don't always live up to this, but from where I came from, where I was very much emotionally reactive and triggered and felt helpless to circumstances around me, when I started working on, when stuff comes at you, control how you react to it. And even when things aren't exactly how you want them to be, try and find the things to be happy about in a situation. Try and maintain your good spirits even when things don't go the way that you wish that they would go. And when stuff is falling around, or when stuff is falling apart all around you and everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off, be the guy that's not that guy. Be the guy that has their wits about them. Be the guy that still says, hey, this is the plan, and this is where I'm planting my flag, and anybody who wants to rally behind me, yes, it looks like the world is falling apart, but here's what we can do, and here's the plan to move forward. Especially over the last 2 years or so, while the world has been falling apart, this has been something that I keep going back to. The first year of lockdowns and hospital overwhelm and all this craziness that was going on, I read this book like every other month. I probably read it 4 or 5 times throughout 2020 because I really needed it. My business was falling apart. 2 of my clients went out of business. The whole world was going crazy. And I'm like, okay, I can't allow myself to fall into the same circle of madness that everybody else is. And for me, it was good medicine, but also to get myself back on track. It was very powerful. And the 2 or 3 clients that I maintained and I stuck with over this whole craziness, one of them, this book is his favorite book as well. And me and him had plenty of conversations where he kept reminding me, hey, focus on what you can control, focus on how you react to things, focus on staying calm, and remember how important it is to the people around you that you're able to stay calm and not in reaction mode. And for me, for my family, for the clients that I was able to hold on to throughout this whole thing, and for the new clients that I've taken on since then, this is just a major, major, powerful point of how I live my life. And I'm so glad that I found this, and I'm so glad that I had a good friend and a client to keep reminding me of it while we went through the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's so important where you point your focus, because I think there's a lot of people who, like me and like you, who might look out at everything that's happening in the world, and they probably don't feel like an overabundance of political or cultural power right now. Like just in the context of like what's politically acceptable and what's culturally acceptable. Lots of people feel like outsiders. So if the window to the world is the screen, right, is the YouTube, is the Facebook, is the Twitter, and that's taking up too much of your time, yeah, there's going to be a greater sense, especially if it's done so unconsciously, of a kind of personal diminishment. But if that focus is it doesn't mean never go there, but if more of that focus is directed into like, this is the room I work in. One day I said, hey, I need a red rug and some shoji panels, and I got them, and I, control this environment, and I control my work, and I have total control over all my social interactions. And, I get to choose the people that are in my life in a real way. And, that was something that I'm very proud, was and is something that I'm very proud of, that so much of what is in my sphere of control and what gets the majority of my focus is stuff that I consciously put there. Yes, I'm aware that things are bad out there. I know a friend will call if shit hits the fan. I check in here and there, but it's not dominating my consciousness. It's not dominating my thoughts. It is a big part of my work, right? Like I have to pay attention to those things, as do you for your work. But again, trying to balance that is really, really important. Or I guess, overbalance like what you can actually control with what you can't. So I really love this one. I'm glad you included it.
And I'm just going to say this too. We have the saying, people don't remember what you tell them. People remember how you make them feel. And when I'm calm, when I'm tranquil, when I'm focused on maintaining a good spirit, I feel better. And I know that it makes the people around me feel better. And the right type of people that are attracted to that will be more attracted to me. And it brings more of the right type of people into my life. And the more control over yourself and your own emotions that you can have, the more control over your reality, your circumstances you can have. So learning to deal with the things, but be able to remain calm, remain balanced, not be knocked off of your square. It's such a powerful thing in life. And it's one of those things that once you start to deliberately focus on maintaining your calm, especially in hectic situations, you start noticing that people change. The way that people interact with you changes. The way that the world interacts with you changes. And for me, it was one of those things where when I started actually practicing this and developing it in myself, I started noticing people wanted to give me more responsibility. People wanted me to take on more and more stuff. People wanted to reward me a lot more than they wanted to before. And that's for all those reasons. It was one of the reasons that this was like my number 2 takeaway from As a Man Thinketh.
And this is like really near the end of the book. So the foundation is laid for this one. I think in the chapter before, chapter 5, it's called The Thought Factor in Achievement. And this is my last one. So this is our 5th big takeaway from As a Man Thinketh. I feel like I'm about to read like a third of the book right here. So I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to try and get through it quickly, but this is a really important one that kind of underlies what we just talked about. All that a man achieves and all that he fails to achieve is the direct result of his own thoughts. In a justly ordered universe where loss of equipoise, which means like equilibrium, it's equipoise, so equilibrium, where loss of equipoise would mean total destruction, individual responsibility must be absolute. A man's weakness and strength, purity and impurity are his own and not another man's. They are brought about by himself and not by another, and they can only be altered by himself, never by another. His condition is also his own and not another man's. His suffering and his happiness are evolved from within. As he thinks, so he is. As he continues to think, so he remains. A strong man cannot help a weaker man unless the weaker is willing to be helped. And even then the weak man must become strong of himself. he must, by his own efforts, develop the strength which he admires in another. None but himself can alter his condition. A little more. It has been useful for men to think and say, quote, many men are slaves because one is an oppressor. Let us hate the oppressor. Now we're seeing some tie-ins. Now we're seeing some things that we have participated in, certainly over the last couple of years. And there's a twist on that many of us have also participated in. Alan continues. Now, however, there is amongst an increasing few a tendency to reverse this judgment and to say, one man is an oppressor because many are slaves. Let us despise the slaves. So we can see the parallels for both of those in our modern world for sure. And calling that to the front of consciousness here, just as it goes with calm and balance from the previous one, I think that's really, really important. The truth is that oppressor and slave are cooperators in ignorance, and while seeming to afflict each other, are in reality afflicting themselves. A perfect knowledge perceives the action of law in the weakness of the oppressed and the misapplied power of the oppressor. A perfect love, seeing the suffering which both states entail, condemns neither. A perfect compassion embraces both oppressor and oppress. He who has conquered weakness and has put away all selfish thoughts belongs neither to oppressor nor oppressed. He is free. So I thought, in the context of our current world, this is a really, really powerful insight about compassion and resourcefulness. And it's not just for other people, right? It's for yourself, right? Keeping that in mind. And most importantly, for our purposes here in mindset and mastery, if you can master this, even without perfection, even without mastery, okay? If you can practice this and you can improve at this, you are going off script, right? You are moving away from somebody else's script by doing this. Because whenever anything goes wrong in the world, socially, politically, medically, whatever, it's like, who are the oppressors and who are the slaves? And why am I better than both? And you're just participating in somebody else's script, somebody else's narrative control. So to step above it, as Alan encourages here, is really, really important in achieving actual freedom.
So to wrap it up, my last and final thought as we're leaving today is what I really took away from this book was how much power I was giving away, how much of my own circumstance I was leaving up to other people and circumstances and the world around me, and how much responsibility I wasn't claiming. And once I started working on some of these things for myself, claiming responsibility for my own thoughts and my own actions, and realizing that I had way more power over the direction my life was heading in than what I had previously believed, my whole life started changing. Everything, my business turned around, my relationships with people started turning around, my influence over my own circumstances and my relationships and my money situation, everything started turning around for me. And this was also when I decided I wanted to do a lot less of the libertarian, conspiracy theory type of content that I was creating up until that point, because I realized I was attracting an audience that I no longer agreed with and that I no longer felt connected to or I no longer resonated with. And it changed my life. It changed my outcome, and it changed the type of people that I was continuing to surround myself with. Stop giving all of your power away is kind of what I got from this book. And I'm glad that it hit me when it hit me. And I'm glad that I was able to convince you to dive into this book and do this episode with me, Brett. And I just want to give you the chance to, since you're much more fresh to the ideas here, what was kind of the number one feeling or mindset shift that you walked away from when you read this book?
One is going to be hard, Nathan. I think like the biggest, like boldest summation of the whole thing is that we are made or unmade by ourselves, right? And only ourselves. And to keep coming, Nathaniel Brandon used to say, no one is coming. That was part of like self-responsibility in the 6 pillars. Nobody's coming to help you, right? And the cynic could look at you saying, well, Nathan, you turned your back on conspiracy theories and the fight for freedom. And look what happened once you gave that up because you read this book. The truth is that you and people like you became brighter lights and better examples of what freedom is. And maybe we have, a longer haul than we thought. But the more bright lights we have and the more examples of people who are truly living free because of what's going on in here and not what's going on around them, I think is, one of the greatest assets that we have in the long-term fight for freer, more autonomous individuals in this world.
Absolutely. Brett, thank you for taking the time with me today to cover this book. I loved hearing what your insights were, and they gave me a little bit of reflection and a different point of view to look at some of the things that I also took away from this book. So I appreciate you on that. And do you have any closing thoughts before we're out of here?
Thank you. Thank you for suggesting this book. This was so great, and I'm just going to read it again tomorrow. I'm actually putting together a group of people to do a book club about it tomorrow, and you're invited, so maybe I'll see you there.
All right, awesome. And if you, the listener, enjoyed this episode, check out all of the cool stuff that we have for you over at mindsetandmastery.com and subscribe so that you never miss an episode in the future. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Catch you later.